The sun was just beginning to rise over the dusty fields of Mars Colony 6. Jacob wiped the sweat from his brow even though the morning was still cool. His small farm sat far from the nearest outpost, surrounded by quiet red hills and silence. He bent down to check his vegetables, carrots, cabbages, a few earth beans. Everything was precious here. Water was limited, food was gold, but this morning, something was wrong. He froze, eyes narrowing. Footprints, small, uneven, fresh, ran through the soft Martian soil. They weren't animal tracks. Not like the sand rodents or the clawbirds, these were feet. Bare, thin, not human. Jacob knelt down, touched the imprint, and followed the trail with his eyes. It led through the rows of cabbage and ended near the fence. Some leaves were broken, others missing. Again, Jacob whispered, sighing. This wasn't the first time. 3 nights ago, he'd noticed missing vegetables. He thought it might be a wild animal, or maybe one of the desperate miners from the hills. But now he knew someone was stealing from him, and that someone was careful, fast, and most of all hungry. He walked back to his small house and opened the old storage shed. Inside was a motion sensor light, dusty but still working. If whoever it was came back, Jacob would be ready. He set it up by the cabbage patch and hid himself behind the barn with a warm coat and a stun stick. The hours passed, the twin moons rose, and the cold settled in. Jacob waited, listening, eyes half closed but alert. Just when he was about to give up, the light flashed, bright and sudden. It lit up the garden like a spotlight. Jacob jumped up, stun stick in hand. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. A woman, no, not quite a woman. An alien female, tall and thin, her skin a soft shade of blue. She wore a torn blanket over her shoulders and had long silver hair tied back with a string. She froze in the light, eyes wide like a trapped animal. In her hands were 2 cabbages and a carrot. She didn't run, didn't scream, didn't fight. Instead, she dropped the food and raised her hands slowly. Her voice shook as she spoke. Please don't hurt me. It's for my kids." Jacob blinked. Confused, she looked dirty, exhausted, but not dangerous. Her arms had bruises and her feet were bleeding. He lowered the stun stick, heart beating fast. "What kids?" he asked. She pointed toward the hills in the distance. 2 little ones, hiding, waiting for me to bring food. They haven't eaten properly in days." Jacob looked at the vegetables on the ground. He thought about all the hard work it took to grow them. But then he looked at her again. She wasn't lying. He could see the pain in her eyes, the desperation. This wasn't a thief, this was a mother. He walked back to his house without a word. She didn't follow, she just stood there, frozen in fear. A few minutes later, Jacob came back with a small cloth bag. Inside were 2 pieces of bread, some dried meat, and a water pouch. He handed it to her without speaking. The alien woman's hand shook as she took it. Her lips trembled, and she whispered something in her language. Then she tried again in broken English. "Thank you. I will repay. I promise." Jacob didn't answer. He simply asked, "What's your name?" She hesitated, then replied softly, "Riva." Jacob nodded. "Riva, take care of your children." He turned to leave, but before he took more than a few steps, he heard her say, "They punish mothers who steal, even if it's to feed young ones." He looked back, her eyes full of fear again. "Who punishes you?" he asked, but she didn't answer. She just disappeared into the dark, carrying the food close to her chest like it was treasure. Jacob stood alone in the cold night. He looked down at the cabbage rows, at the broken stems, at the soft footprints fading in the dirt. Something had changed in him, and he didn't know why. He wasn't angry anymore. He was curious and maybe a little afraid too, because if she was scared of someone worse than him, then who was out there watching her? The next day, Jacob kept checking the edge of his farm. He didn't know if Riva would return or vanish like a ghost. He had barely slept, her words repeating in his head. They punish mothers who steal. What kind of world did she come from, where stealing food to keep your children alive was a punishable crime? By mid-morning, he noticed a movement near the fence. He looked through his old binoculars. There she was, Riva, standing still, waiting. Holding nothing in her hands, she didn't cross the fence this time. She just stood and watched his house like she didn't know if it was safe. Jacob walked out slowly, hands empty, no weapon. As he got closer, he saw that her skin looked even paler than before. Her eyes weren't just tired now, they were frightened, sharp, and darting around like she expected someone else to appear at any second. "Are your kids okay?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. Riva didn't speak right away. She looked behind her, toward the distant woods, then turned back. They are cold, she said softly. Weak. She took a slow breath. I didn't bring them here. I'm afraid. Afraid of me? Jacob asked. She shook her head quickly. No. Afraid of the ones watching. They follow, they punish, they don't care if you beg. Jacob frowned. Who are they? She hesitated, then whispered. Syndicate. Slaver faction. They want to take my children, sell them. Her lips trembled and she looked down. I ran when they weren't looking. They branded my wrist, see? She pulled back her sleeve, and Jacob saw the faint scar, burnt skin shaped like a twisted chain. His stomach turned. He had heard of syndicate raiders before, pirate-run slave networks operating in the outer colonies. But most people believed they stayed far away from human territory. Apparently not. Why my farm? Jacob asked. Why not go to the outpost? Ask for help? Riva looked up with those haunted eyes. Outpost turns us in, she said. One mother last month. Gone. Her baby too, sold. Jacob felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. He sat down on a stone nearby, rubbing his forehead. This wasn't just about missing vegetables anymore. This was about survival, hers, her children's, and now, somehow his farm was part of it. After a long pause, he said, Bring your kids here. Riva gasped, her eyes wide. What? I said bring them, Jacob repeated. They can't stay out there freezing, starving. Not while I have food and fire. No, she said quickly. Almost in a panic. No, they'll track me. They'll smell the footprints. They'll come here. And you... Her voice cracked. They'll hurt you too. Jacob looked her in the eyes. I'm not afraid, he said firmly. And you shouldn't have to be either. Riva shook her head, overwhelmed. No one helps for free, she said bitterly. No one human. I'm not no one, Jacob replied. And I'm definitely not syndicate. Silence settled between them, heavy and unsure. Then she finally nodded once. Slow and cautious, I will try, tonight. If they're strong enough to walk. Jacob gave her a small wrapped pack of food and a warm old scarf from his closet. She took it with shaking hands and whispered, Thank you. Jacob. It was the first time she said his name. That night he waited again. This time by the back porch, light off, door open. The stars above were clear and cold. The wind soft but sharp. Then he heard the sound, small. Stumbling footsteps on the path, he stood up as two tiny figures came into view behind Riva. The children were thin, one a boy, maybe 5, the other a girl, barely older. They had the same pale blue skin as their mother and glowing yellow eyes that looked far too tired for such young faces. They clung to her cloak like shadows, shivering, not speaking. Jacob stepped aside and opened the door wider. Come in, he said gently. It's warm. Riva helped them step into the house, and their eyes widened at the heat and light. Jacob brought out a bowl of warm stew and placed it on the table. The children stared at it, unsure. Then the girl reached forward slowly, grabbed a spoon and tasted it. Tears filled her eyes immediately, and she nodded to her little brother. They both started eating in silence. Riva sat nearby, watching them with her hands pressed to her mouth, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Jacob didn't say anything. He just watched quietly from across the room, and in that moment something deep inside him shifted. This wasn't charity, this wasn't guilt. It was something else, something older, something human. He didn't know it yet, but this night would change everything. Jacob barely slept that night. Even though the alien children were safe inside his home, his mind was racing. He kept hearing the girls' soft crying, not from pain but from relief, and Riva, their mother, sat near the window all night. She didn't sleep, didn't close her eyes once. She just watched the forest like a soldier on guard, like she expected someone to come for them at any moment. By morning, the little boy had curled up on a folded blanket near the fire. The girl was still asleep at the edge of the old couch. Jacob made some tea and handed a cup to Riva. She took it slowly, her fingers trembling, her eyes still fixed on the trees beyond the window. I'll take them back soon, she whispered without looking at him. They can't stay here. If syndicate scouts catch their scent, they'll burn this place. Jacob shook his head. You're not going back to the forest, he said, firm but calm. They're safer here than freezing in the dirt. She finally turned to face him. There are drones in the skies, she said. Metal ones, they sniff heat, they find trails. They don't just hunt with eyes. They use smell, sound, memory. Jacob leaned on the wall thinking. How long have you been running? He asked. Riva looked down at her tea. Since they took my husband, she said quietly. They said he owed them for food. But he never made a deal. They lied, they branded us, and when he resisted, they beat him. I ran the night they tried to take my daughter. Jacob swallowed hard. This wasn't just a story anymore, this was real, too real, and it was now on his land. I need to see where you were hiding, he said after a moment. Riva frowned, confused. Why? To understand what you've been through, Jacob replied. And to see if they're already watching. She hesitated, then nodded. Wait until sunset, she said. They watched the sky during the day, that evening. Jacob followed Riva through the woods behind his garden. The air was cold and dry leaves cracked under his boots, but Riva moved silently, like a shadow soon. They reached a small clearing between tall, twisted trees. Hidden by rock and brush, there in the middle, was a half-collapsed tent made of torn cloth and vines. Inside were 2 tiny sleeping pads made from old moss and alien fabric scraps. This was home, she whispered. For nearly 12 nights, Jacob stepped carefully, noticing the broken branch overhead. It had snapped, likely during the last windstorm, nearly crushing one of the pads. A pile of bones lay near the tent, bird-like creatures. Bones picked clean. This was survival, not living, and the fact that the kids had even survived out here amazed him. He picked up a torn piece of cloth, saw a child's drawing on it, a picture of what looked like a house, a sun and 3 blue stick figures holding hands. His chest tightened. You shouldn't come back here again, he said. Voice low, from now on, your home is with me. She looked at him uncertain. But they'll come. Let them come, Jacob said. I have walls and alarms, and I've survived pirates before. Riva closed her eyes, almost like she wanted to believe him but couldn't allow herself to. Jacob placed a hand gently on her shoulder. I'm not doing this because I expect something back, he said. I'm doing it because someone should have helped you a long time ago. They returned to the farm under darkness. Jacob carried a few of the kids' old things in a sack, drawings, a small blanket, a carved wooden toy. When they arrived, the children were waiting by the door, sleepy but alert. The girl ran to her mother and hugged her tightly. Riva held both kids close, as if afraid they would disappear. Later that night, Jacob sat on the porch. Looking at the stars, Riva joined him quietly, her blanket wrapped around her like armor. They used to say humans were cruel, she said softly. Cold, proud, full of machines and guns, Jacob chuckled. Some are, he admitted, but most of us just want peace. And maybe a little land to grow beans. She smiled faintly, the first real smile he'd seen on her face. Thank you, she said again, but this time her voice was stronger. You didn't just give food, you gave hope. Jacob didn't answer. He just leaned back and looked at the stars. But deep down he knew things were not over. If Riva was right, if the syndicate was near, then this peace would not last. Something was coming through the trees. And next time it wouldn't be a starving mother. The wind howled across the empty fields, carrying with it a sound Jacob had never wanted to hear again. A low metallic hum, steady, sharp. Like a predator sniffing for prey, he stepped out of his barn, eyes scanning the sky there above the red hills. Floated a machine, black, sleek, its metal body glowing with red lines. A syndicate drone, a hunter built to track the weak. Jacob's heart tightened. He turned quickly and shut the barn doors, his eyes landing on the 2 alien children playing with sticks near the chicken coop. Inside now, he ordered, voice firm. The children froze, confused, until Riva appeared. Her face pale, she had heard it too. Her hands shook as she grabbed her children and pulled them close. They found us, she whispered, eyes wide with fear. Jacob, you don't understand. Once the hunters mark a scent, they never stop. Jacob grabbed his old rifle from the wall. It wasn't much against syndicate metal, but it made him feel less empty-handed. Go inside, keep them low, he said. Riva hesitated, then nodded and hurried into the farmhouse, locking the door behind her. The hum grew louder, closer, until Jacob could see the drone's thin legs moving beneath it, sensors scanning the soil. Its red eye blinked, pausing near the cabbage patch where Riva had once stolen food. Jacob clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a machine, it was a bloodhound. And it had caught her trail. He aimed the rifle steady. One shot cracked through the night, striking the drone's armor. The machine jerked, sparks flying. But it didn't fall, instead it turned, scanning, locking onto him. Its red light focused, and suddenly a beam of heat blasted into the soil at his feet. Burning the dirt black, Jacob dove behind the water tank. Cursing under his breath, the drone circled, humming louder. sending out pulses of sound that rattled the barn doors. Inside the farmhouse, Riva pressed her children's heads to her chest, whispering in her own language. She could hear the drones screech through the walls. Her eyes filled with tears, not from fear of her own death, but from fear that her children would be taken if Jacob failed. Outside, Jacob rolled from cover to cover, his rifle cracking again. This time, the bullet pierced deeper. Shattering one of the drone's arms, the machine shrieked. Its red light flickering wildly, it swooped lower, claws opening, ready to strike. Jacob grabbed the old plasma cutter from the barn wall. It was heavy, slow, but powerful. He waited, breathing hard, until the drone came close enough. Then he swung the cutter upward, sparks flying, slicing through one of its legs. The machine screamed, spun out of control, and slammed into the soil, breaking apart in a flash of smoke and fire. Silence followed, heavy, broken only by Jacob's ragged breathing. He dropped the cutter, his hands shaking, sweat on his brow. But before he could catch his breath, Riva appeared at the doorway, holding her children, her eyes wide in horror. "You don't understand," she said again, voice trembling. "Where there is one hunter, more will come. They never stop until the prey is gone." Jacob looked at the broken drone, smoke rising into the night sky. She was right. The wreckage was a signal, a beacon, a message to the syndicate. The prey is here. He stepped forward, touched her shoulder. "Then we make this farm more than a hiding place," he said, his voice steady. "We make it a fortress." Riva stared at him, stunned. "You would risk your life for us, for me?" Jacob didn't answer right away. He looked down at the children clinging to her legs, their eyes wide, their small hands shaking. Then he looked back at her and said quietly, "No one should live in fear like this. Not on my land." Riva closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks for the first time since he met her. The fear in her eyes softened into something else. "Trust," she whispered. "My real name is Riva Lan, but the syndicate calls me thief, runaway." "Worthless," Jacob shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "Your name isn't thief. Your name is Riva, and as long as I stand, they won't take you or your children." The wind shifted, carrying away the smoke. But both of them knew this was only the beginning. The syndicate would come, stronger, faster, in numbers, and when they did, Jacob would have to stand not as a farmer, but as the shield between a hunted mother and the empire that wanted her broken. The night after Jacob destroyed the drone was quiet. Too quiet, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Jacob didn't trust silence. It meant something worse was waiting. Inside the farmhouse, Riva sat at the table, her children asleep nearby. She had wrapped them in Jacob's spare blankets, and for the first time they weren't shivering, but her own hands kept trembling, her eyes darting toward every creak of the wooden walls. Jacob set down 2 cups of tea sitting across from her. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "For now." Riva stared at the steam rising from the cup. Then in a voice as soft as a secret, she said, "My real name isn't Thief. My real name is Riva Lan." Jacob nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "I never thought you were just a thief." Her eyes lifted, surprised, almost confused. "No one has called me by my name in months," she whispered. "They only call me runaway, slave, worthless." Jacob leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Tell me, Riva. I need to know what I'm protecting you from." She took a long breath. Her voice shook at first, but then it grew stronger. "I was a teacher once on the colony of Veyran. My people had schools, families, songs. I taught children to read, to draw, to dream. But the syndicate came. They said our land was debt we could never pay. They chained our men, branded our women, and sold our children, my husband." She stopped, swallowing hard. "He fought. They beat him until he couldn't stand. I escaped with the children the night they came for my daughter. Since then, we've been shadows, moving, hiding, stealing food where we could." Jacob clenched his fists, his chest burning with anger. He had heard rumors of syndicate raids, but hearing it from her made the cruelty real. "And the others?" he asked quietly. "The other families?" Her eyes filled with tears. "They are gone," she said simply. "Some sold, some dead. I only have these 2 left. If I fail them, everything is lost." Jacob looked at the sleeping children, their small faces peaceful for once. "You won't fail them," he said. "Not while I'm here, over the next few days." The farm became something different. Jacob taught Riva how to feed the chickens, how to water the vegetables carefully. The children followed him everywhere, small shadows at his heels. The boy giggled when Jacob lifted him onto the tractor seat. The girl helped him gather eggs, her glowing eyes brightening with each simple task. For the first time in a long while, Jacob's farm didn't feel lonely. It felt alive. But word travels fast in small colonies. Neighbors stopped by, curious. They asked questions, too many questions. Who are they, Jacob? Why do you have blueskins living in your house? Better be careful, the patrols don't like strangers. Jacob brushed them off. But he knew eyes were watching. Riva saw it too, and fear grew in her again. She whispered one night, "You risk everything for us. They'll call you traitor, they'll burn your land." Jacob only shrugged. "I've rebuilt this farm twice after storms. I can rebuild again if I must. But I won't rebuild my soul if I let them take you." Her eyes widened at his words. She turned her face away, but Jacob saw the tears she tried to hide. One morning, as the children played near the garden, Jacob noticed something near the fence. Blood, small drops dark against the soil. He followed the trail carefully and found a piece of torn cloth snagged on the wood. Riva's cloth. He rushed back to the house, but she was gone. Only the children remained. Confused, their eyes wide. "Where's Mama?" the little girl asked, clutching his hand. Jacob's stomach dropped. He ran across the field, scanning the horizon. Then in the distance, near the edge of the road, he saw soldiers, 3 syndicate patrolmen dragging someone between them. Riva, bound, her wrists bleeding. Jacob's blood boiled. He knew this wasn't just theft. The syndicate didn't want food. They wanted to make an example. He grabbed his plasma tool and rifle. His hands shook, not with fear but with fury. He had made a promise, and now he would keep it. That night, Jacob sat alone by the fire. Sharpening his tools, the children slept, unaware of what was coming. His farm was no longer just a patch of land. It was a battleground, and he would not let it fall without a fight. Tomorrow he would go to the outpost. Tomorrow he would get her back, no matter what it cost. Because her name wasn't Thief. Her name was Riva Lion, and she deserved to live. And anyone who hides them belongs in chains too. Jacob's jaw clenched. His hand tightened on the plasma tool hidden under his coat. But before he could move, a younger soldier nearby leaned closer, whispering quickly, "She's in Block 4, down the hall, 3rd cell, but watch out. The commander has orders to transfer her off-world by dawn." Jacob's eyes flicked to him, then back to the officer. He gave a slow nod, turned as if leaving. But his steps carried him down the side corridor. Silent, quick. The hall smelled of rust and damp stone. Chains rattled in the dark, voices moaned. Then he saw her. Riva sat on the floor of the 3rd cell, wrists bound, face bruised. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Jacob," she whispered. "No, you shouldn't be here. They'll—" The heavy clang of boots cut her off. 2 soldiers rounded the corner. Rifles raised. Jacob moved first, swinging the plasma tool. The blade of white heat tore through the first rifle. Sparks flying, he shoved the second soldier against the wall, smashing the butt of his gun into his helmet. The man collapsed with a groan. "Stand back," Jacob said to Riva. He sliced through the lock. The metal melting in seconds, the door swung open. And he pulled her up, her knees buckled. But his arm held her steady. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded weakly. "Yes, but Jacob, more are coming." Alarms suddenly blared. Red lights flashing. The building shook with the sound of boots. Voices shouting orders. Jacob grabbed Riva's hand. Pulling her down the hall, they burst through the back door into the sunlight. But a squad of syndicate guards was already waiting. Rifles aimed, Jacob pushed Riva behind him. Raising his own weapon, the guard sneered. "You can't win, farmer. Hand her over and maybe we'll let you crawl home." Jacob's eyes blazed with fury. He lifted the plasma cutter high, its glow reflecting in his eyes. "No," he said, his voice carrying like thunder. "She's not your property. She's a mother, she's free, and she's under my protection." The first shot cracked. Grazing his shoulder, pain burned, but Jacob didn't stop. He fired back, dropped one soldier, then another. Riva grabbed a fallen rifle and fired clumsily, her hands trembling but her aim true together. They fought like a storm breaking chains. Metal clanged, shouts echoed. Dust filled the air. When the smoke cleared, the soldiers were on the ground, some unconscious, others fleeing. Jacob stood panting, blood soaking his sleeve. Riva clung to his arm, tears streaming down her face. "You came for me," she whispered, voice breaking. "No one has ever come for me." Jacob looked at her, his eyes hard but warm. "I told you, Riva, you're not alone anymore. They stumbled back toward the truck. But even as they drove away, both knew the fight was not over. The syndicate had been embarrassed, and they would not forgive it. They would come with more men, more machines, and next time, the farm itself would be the battlefield. Jacob gripped the wheel tighter. His jaw set. If they wanted war, he would give them one. For Riva, for her children, for the simple right to be free. The farm was no longer just a farm, it had become a fortress. After the battle at the outpost, Jacob knew the syndicate would not forget. He spent every day strengthening the fences, rigging alarms, placing traps along the fields. The children helped carry tools. Riva patched broken boards. They all moved like a single family preparing for a storm. And the storm came 3 nights later. The hills lit up with red fire. Engines roared, syndicate trucks rolling toward the farm like a swarm of metal beasts. Drones buzzed in the sky, their red eyes burning against the night. The children clung to Riva, terrified. Jacob stood on the porch, rifle in hand, his heart steady. This was no longer about crops or land, this was about freedom. About drawing a line no empire could cross. The first blast shook the ground. Tearing through the outer fence, Jacob fired back, his bullet sparking against armor. But before the syndicate could press forward, something unexpected happened. Lights appeared in the distance, lanterns, torches, headlights from colony vehicles. Dozens of neighbors marched across the fields, men and women with tools, rifles, and voices. They had heard Jacob's broadcast from the stolen outpost console. They had heard Riva's story, and they had chosen to stand. The syndicate patrol faltered. They had expected one farmer, not a whole colony. Jacob stepped forward, shouting so all could hear, "You will not take her. You will not take her children. You will not take anyone from this land again." His voice carried across the fields. The neighbors echoed, their shouts rising like thunder. The syndicate commander sneered, but even he knew the numbers were turning. If he ordered his men to fire, half of them wouldn't leave alive. He spat on the ground, signaling the retreat. Engines roared as the trucks turned back, drones whirring away into the night. Silence followed. Then a cheer rose from the crowd. Loud, fierce, unstoppable. Jacob lowered his rifle, his body trembling with exhaustion. Riva ran to him, clutching his arm, tears shining in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved us." Jacob shook his head, looking around at the colony folk still standing with their lights. "No, we did it," he said, voice rough but proud. "They wanted us divided, afraid, but tonight, we showed them we stand together." The days that followed changed everything. Neighbors brought seeds, tools, even spare parts for rebuilding. The farm grew larger, stronger. Children from the colony came to play with Riva's little ones. And for the first time in months, the sound of laughter filled the fields. Jacob tilled new soil, with Riva working beside him, her hands steady, her eyes no longer darting in fear. At night, she told stories in her language, teaching Jacob's neighbors words of hope and kindness. Slowly, the colony stopped calling her alien and began calling her neighbor. One evening, Jacob stood at the edge of the cabbage patch, the place where he had first seen her stealing in the moonlight. Now rows of vegetables stretched farther than before, but none of them were guarded with suspicion. They were grown to be shared. To keep no child hungry again, Riva joined him, her children running in the grass behind her. She placed her hand on his, quiet but strong. "You gave me more than food," she said softly. "You gave me a home, you gave my children a future. I cannot repay that." Jacob looked at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You don't need to repay me," he said. "You just need to live." That's enough. They stood together in the fading light. A farmer, an alien mother, and her children. And though the syndicate still lurked somewhere in the shadows of the galaxy, on this small piece of soil they had been defeated. Not with guns, not with war, but with bread, with courage. With the simple power of standing together, the garden that once held stolen vegetables now fed an entire community. And its roots carried more than life, they carried hope.